All right, I'm so excited to have people here for today's issue of Learning Leaders. And I'm so excited to have Jessica with us. Jessica, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, start with the hard question. Who am I? So again, Jessica Cebulka. I am a recent graduate of the master's program in Instructional Design and Technology. And I am reinventing myself. I have a background, my undergrad is in philosophy and history, those big, strong STEM degrees. I worked in some finance, some legal fields, and then I realized that I was trying to become an instructional designer without knowing what an instructional designer was. So it got to the point where I wanted to go back for a master's. And I knew I needed more education. So I actually live in Bloomsburg and have for many years before encountering this program, and stumbled upon the Bloomsburg University, now Commonwealth University, program for the Instructional Design and Technology degree. So I'm reading on the website what instructional design is and going, wait, that's exactly what I want to do. This is a field. So again, it was kind of like an epiphany to me that this is what I've been trying to work on. I worked in a small law firm that had maybe 12 employees, and I kept pushing to standardize how we open files and create job aids. And they're like, we have 12 people. So this was really, like I said, a revelation. And I lucked out because you and I have a mutual acquaintance. My Aunt Joan, her kids played soccer with you. So she got me in touch with you so I could ask what really is instructional design before committing my life to a new change and venue. So again, I just graduated in December, not too long ago. So I survived the program, and now looking forward, seeking a job and getting out there into the real world.
No, fantastic. What a great way to talk about, because a lot of people wonder, like, oh, well, how do I get started in instructional design? What kind of background do I need? Do I have to have a teaching background or anything like that? And you've shown that you don't have to. So you got into the program. Are you very technical, or did you just kind of learn everything that you needed within the program?
So that's a grading on a curve, technical speaking. So my parents have worked in telecommunications my whole life, and my dad's very into tech. So I mean, we always had a household computer. I can remember like having a printer when it was that folded different lines with the dots on the side. So we've had that forever. So I would consider myself not very technically advanced because of the standard I hold myself to. However, if you asked some of my coworkers in the small law firm, I was basically on-site tech support. So there really is a curve. I am not a coder. I don't have any background in information technology, but I am a great Googler. You can find almost anything you need if you can Google the right question. So I have a firm background in Word and Office, but I did not know any of the authoring tools. I also didn't have much background in graphic design, which is really helpful in instructional design. But I learned everything basically from the program, because you have such a wealth of information. There's two courses on authoring. So I learned all my tools that I needed. I've got a firm background in Articulate, Captivate, and some other things thrown in there. I've become a big convert to Canva and tools like that to help me cover up and polish off my graphic design weaknesses. And the concept behind, like I said, I was trying to become an instructional designer without knowing it. And I think a lot of my colleagues in the program who are educators, because there's a lot of teachers that feed into this program, have that innate intuition as to what the instructional design principles are without having the theory behind it. So that's what I loved about the program at Bloomsburg is you guys do practical application, but also give us that theory background so that we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And the really interesting thing is talking about the theoretical background, like the context and understanding how the learning happens. you did something really extraordinary. So we every year take students to DevLearn and we compete in the student competition, which we've won for the past 7 years. So our students go, they show projects, and we're very proud of the fact that they've won student best DevLearn. But your project stepped beyond that. You won best in show. And so non-vendor. So for people that don't know that, when you go to DevLearn, there's this big, huge thing called DemoFest, and everybody competes. Got the shirt, uh, uh, and they compete in different categories. And one category is vendors, and so you don't want a non-vendor, somebody within a company, to compete with the vendors. And then you have students, and they usually do well. But we've never had best in show non-vendor, meaning you won not just a student category, but an industry category. So can you tell us a little bit about the project? And then if you're able to, we'd love to see some of what you developed that won best in show non-vendor.
Yeah, it was very humbling and very exciting. And it was funny because they announced the student winner, Brittany Breland. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to go on stage, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden they were calling my name and people were like, go up, go up. I was like, I didn't know we could do that. But to segue from theory, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. I do actually have kind of a graphic that I created recently when I knew I was going to be talking with you. This is the basis of my project. When I took, and the genesis is the course I took with you for an instructional game design. And you broke down for us Gagne's hierarchy of learning. You have to start with your factual, build to concept, procedural, then problem solving. And there are different types of games that work best with those. And I basically have been training my entire life for this. I have been playing board games, video games. Now, I wouldn't classify myself as a hardcore gamer, but I definitely skew towards the board games. But I love the experience. And I thought to myself, and one of the things that really resonated with me, especially about your description and the concentration, because I also got the certificate in instructional game design, is think of how much time we all spend on our phones playing games, how much time we spend avoiding life playing games of all different kinds, and everybody has their own game. So basically, I wanted to tackle the obstacles that you would see in incorporating games in the corporate environment for corporate learning. So my website goes through, and that's the project is I made a website. The idea being here that you would be able to see the different breakdowns of I'm going to skip down to here. I broke down the instructional design concept that I used for each level, how I implemented it, modifications that you could do, and then corporate adaptation. So the idea being here, I'm kind of guiding you through how to match the content that you want to impart on your audience with the best tools to do that.
And Egyptian. Characteristics of each deity individually, common traits they share, and the pantheons they belong to are learned, and then used to complete the levels. All games are not equal. You must choose wisely to gain the great rewards from a well-executed instructional game. No Mythstakes allows you to explore instructional games, and to identify the right approach for your content, environment, and technical resources. Visit our site,
So that's kind of my background there is I think there should be more games in the world in corporate learning. And so I kind of go through here what the intended use is. So practical application here. This is something that I actually got through the internship that I did that's part of the master's program. One of our requirements is to complete an internship, and I did that with the Commercial Learning and Development at Beijing, USA, and that's a biotech company. So one of the presentations that I did with the company was on microlearning. And so we explored the forgetting curve and how to avoid that. So games aren't necessarily the best in and of themselves to teach content all by themselves, depending on how you design it. I don't see this being something that is easy for learning and development professionals to jump into an elaborate story environment where they can teach all the content that they need and then have them explore a wonderful world. That's just not practical at this stage. So what I see this as is short, quick review and reactivation. So we want to space out the learning, which means you're going through different you're not trying to dump it all in 1 hour or a one-day seminar. We're spacing it out over time. And so you need to review the content that you did at the last session. A game is a really fun way to re-engage that information. It's also an exceptional way to reactivate after you've learned that content. Say you're learning a safety procedure, and then you're back on the job and it's been 3 months. Well, maybe you don't remember all of the steps to that safety procedure. You can play a quick immersive game that reminds you of those processes. So that's kind of what I have here is how are you supposed to use games? How can you use games? And then how to pair them together the best way. Well, and sorry, go ahead.
No, this is awesome stuff. And I definitely agree with games as you were talking about. So this is what you showed at DemoFest?
Yes.
So you put together this whole, basically a portfolio
yes.
of projects that you did throughout the course of your master's degree?
And most of this is pulled from instructional game design, the one course that I did spring 2023. And basically the concept there was we had 4 different platforms that we had to design a game on. There was Enterprise Game Stack. So that's my card game levels. They're sorting card mechanics. So basically I put together, and I have a little evolution of how this came about. I put together cards to carry forward the information. You can see on the left is my first attempt at creating a card, because I knew I wanted to custom create because I wanted to have a visual, a character to represent the deity. I wanted a common trait icon. So dry text doesn't always do it for me. So I wanted to have color reinforcement. I wanted to have icons. I wanted to have, on the right-hand side, the lightning bolt is Zeus's individual relic, so that you have a visual representation. I'm coming at the learner from all different angles to figure out because we learn differently, to find the best way to work with this particular learner. And so I really utilized my fellow students. So the 2022 DemoFest winner, Vishaka Hedge, she is the one that kind of steered me towards Canva for designing some of these. So I did all the characters from, I actually downloaded templates from Vecteezy and then did Adobe Illustrator and spent way too much time customizing each of these characters. So I used the same base, and then I changed hair color, I changed eyes, noses, those kind of thing. And like I said, I went down the rabbit hole on this. So this is one thing that Vishaka had I learned after the fact is limit yourself. Try and find what you need more than what you would love to have. So once I had those done, I started designing the card. And as you can see on the left, it was very rough and not very polished looking. So Vishaka had recommended using Canva. I, at that time, was not very comfortable with Canva. So I utilized my available resources and went to a friend of mine who's also a graduate of the program, Lillian Fields. She has a stronger background in graphic design and is an amazing artist. She spent about an hour walking through different options. So like the ring behind Zeus here was her idea. She helped me find like the papyrus looking background and everything like that. So this really just kind of came alive. And then I have two versions of the cards. I have the card sorting, which is at the top here. And then I have a resource guide that goes for later levels. Let me see if I can pull that up. I call it the curator's guide because in level of what the construct level, you have to be a curator. But basically all of these cards got implemented into a resource. So as you're learning about them, you would come to this resource. And I designed it so that you kind of reinforce if you have a standard operating procedure or a resource guide that your employees would be going to. You teach them to go to that resource to find, because in this day and age, memorization is unfortunately kind of a back burner technique. Everybody can Google, so you don't have to memorize as much. So teaching people where to go to find the information is a little more critical.
Oh, that's great. And you had mentioned, I mean, this looks wonderful. You had mentioned the term construct, and I'm sure you'll get to that. Could you just tell us real quickly what construct is?
Yes, absolutely. I got completely sidetracked. So that was the first platform was Enterprise Game Stack. So that's level 1 and level 2 both use Enterprise Game Stack. And then level 3 is PowerPoint. This was a really critical level because one of the obstacles that you often encounter in learning and development is budget. So to get buy-in for a whole new program or software for a company to develop a game, you're just building obstacles against yourself. So this is a resource with something that you probably already have subscribed in your company. Level 4 is Construct 3. So this is essentially a video game that I designed, and I do have it back end up here. So Construct 3 is a software, a web-based tool that you can design all kinds of things. And like I said, Brittany Breland, who was the student category winner, also designed in Construct 3. So you basically design a layout. You can incorporate different characters or sprites, and they have interactions with different elements. So I threw the kitchen sink at this and tried to come up with as many different interactions as possible. Once you have the content, the layout, the information there, you then have to code essentially what interactions do what. And that's your event sheet. So you use different variables to encounter, and people who are familiar with Captivate and Articulate are going to be familiar with the variable concept that triggers different events. And then you have these different codings to tell it to do something. So for example, this one here on line 67, when my curator sprite has a collision, so I navigate into and collide with the atrium door, you go to the atrium door target. So I'm telling it what to do when this occurs. Very kind of intricate, but still a step removed from technical coding. So I didn't have to learn a whole new language or anything like that, but you still have to be able to walk it through different dynamics. So I have a pretty extensive background for this. I have the different coordinates where I wanted things to interact with each other or spawn and create. And I had to keep very careful, like this is all probably garbly-gook to someone else, but it's very specific to how I wanted things to happen. I had to keep a list of what variables that I was working with and what my mind was thinking when I created the variable. Because no matter how, I mean, that's one of the things that we talk about in multiple courses at Bloomsburg is making sure that you name things so that you can figure out what they are later, and so that someone else can jump into your project and know what they are. But I have found, even on my best day, when I try and name things, I don't always remember exactly what I was thinking. So this was helpful to me to kind of work that out. And then there is a scoring mechanism, because one of the key items to a game is to be able to have feedback. And one of our easiest methods of that is scoring. So I did a whole calculation to figure out how much I wanted to penalize or reward, and go back and forth. So it was definitely a process that came together over many, many months. This was kind of the crown jewel and the beast for this process. So let me go back to the game here. The website has, a quick preview. It has a link so that you can go directly to the game to play it. I also did like quick demo videos. So there's no sound on this, but I can kind of walk you through. The idea is you have to have a story to it. So you're a curator applying for a job at the Museum of Myths. You have to find relics from the new shipment that are in the warehouse. You have a list that tells you which relics you need to get, but that list has verbal descriptions and the relics have icons or visual descriptions. So you have to kind of translate that. You're proving your knowledge with the curator's guide, and you search the shelves on the warehouse to find the correct relic. So for example, this is for Frigg and it's the spinning wheel, so we need that. So we collect it and we get rewarded with points. Once you have all of the relics that you need, you have to put the right one in the right exhibit. And there's 3 different wings, one for each pantheon. And then once you install it, you get a bonus question of what is the deity's name. You get that right, you get extra points. And then there's a result screen for depending on how well you did. There's 3 tiers to kind of encourage replayability if you didn't score as high as you might want. That's kind of the overview. And again, I have kind of screenshots of how I did it. I have the breakdown of the ID concept, implementation, and corporate adaptation. So for this one, this is the most involved. And so I can definitely see it as procedures for safety, for something that has to be handled in a very specific way. This is a procedure-based game, but you can see it. There's a fun element. There's an area of safety where you can kind of fail, but still learn without maybe blowing up the lab. So that was kind of my design there. And then the last level is the training arcade. We were able to pick from their repertoire of games. And so I did a detective level. So that's kind of the overall.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So really good work on the construct game. Well, all of it, but the construct game, very detailed, very, very complex. And you really applied some application to what somebody would be experienced from a learning perspective. What type of, you were exposed to a lot of different game types here. Was that valuable? Was that helpful? What do you think you learned from being exposed to just not creating one game, but creating several?
Yeah, so one of the things I dug up was how this all started. So one of the things is life can be somewhat overwhelming if you're just, hey, create a game. So I love the fact that the instructional game design course gave us these 4 platforms that we had to use. So we knew going in, you have to use this platform. And then to go back to the original concept and theory behind this, I knew what kind of content would fit to each of them. Now, full disclosure, your course didn't require us to use the same content for each of those platforms. That was my fault. I chose a challenge there.
A good challenge to choose, however.
Yes. So I knew I wanted to have something that incorporated factual, conceptual, procedural, and problem solving. So that's a tall order to have a content. So I went with mythology because I love mythology. It tells us a lot about who we are as human beings. And it's so story-based that there was so much content that I could pull from. And these are my handwritten notes from a car ride with my dad. And I mentioned my dad before. He's very immersed in the gaming world. He remembers, playing the word-based, like, exploring games where you printed out a map and then typed in, and things that would drive me nuts, but pre-graphics, essentially. So he's been around the block. He's done a lot of investing in Kickstarter games, board games of all types. So he was a great resource for me to go to. And it's one of those things that is very innate and intuitive to someone who plays a lot of games, is I didn't have to really explain the factual, conceptual. I didn't have to explain the different tiers. He immediately, innately went, okay, yeah, so we could start with, like, sorting them into pantheons. And I'm like, yes, we could. That would be great. So the top level here is card game, and I have almost exactly the same level 1 sort into pantheon, level 2 sort by common traits. And you can see the description of the card, which goes very closely to what my card ended up being. It's got the character, the common trait, the individual relic, and a description. So I stayed very true to this original concept. We didn't know at the time what the training arcade game was going to be, and the PowerPoint completely morphed. That was something very different. So you always start with an idea, but then have to adjust as you go and be flexible. But Construct 3 is almost exactly what I just showed you. That was, again, from my dad's brain. He went Indiana Jones. So we're dealing with mythology, we're dealing with ancient culture, so finding relics and then putting them in a museum. So, I mean, that's essentially what the story is driving it. Yes, I had to flesh out the mechanics of that, but this was my guiding force. And so I started with this, handwritten guideline, and then I moved on to something a little more structured. I went into research mode, and I stuck with specifically online research because it's not an academic paper. And with mythology, so you can see these are just a few of the sites that I went to try and find information. Mythology has a lot of incarnations. So you may remember this story of Odin, but maybe it's a different story of Odin. So I picked the characteristics that I wanted and that fit with what I was designing. But this was kind of my roadmap. Was I ended up with 24 different deities. So I had my common traits, what I was going to have each one represented with, how they coordinated with each other. Again, I reinforced different things with colors. And then I got even deeper into it, and I did their full descriptions. So these descriptions contain all of the information that I would reference later on.
Oh, okay.
This is my textbook.
This is kind of your design document, your subject matter expertise that you're going to use throughout the project.
Yes, and it was very helpful because I did it, number one, I did it on a Google Doc so I could get to it anywhere. But you can also, if you did in Word, you can copy and paste things into different areas. And supplemental to this, I had a design doc with my color schemes so that I would stay consistent with my hex codes and everything like that. So that was critical to me to have these different options. And one of the exercises that you had us do was to create one-page design documents. So this is, the development of the card game. Then I have the development of the PowerPoint game. And then I have the Construct 3 game, which is very overwhelming because I found it very hard to fit everything onto one page. But that's critical. That's important. This is an extremely valuable exercise in that you have to really boil it down to the most basic concepts. And one of the things that I personally struggle with is not letting perfection get in the way of the good. So you can see this is really rough graphically, but it's basically just showing what's going to happen. It's a visualization. So that to me was a really important step in the process of learning to be an instructional designer, is just get it on the page, get something down and work from there. I mean, it all started with a handwritten page. So you kind of go from there. One of Dr. Brisson's courses, she teaches us on infographics. And she says, your first step should be to draw it out by hand. I'm like, I can't draw. That's going to be awful. But I actually found that was very helpful to practically draw it out and figure out the spacing. And even if no one else would know what I meant by this squiggle, I knew.
Right,
So
right.
it was very helpful to go through that process.
Well, no, this is good. And it's really great to see your evolution of thinking to get from point A to point B, and how the instructional design process kind of underlined all of that you did, and really it is great to see how this works.
Yeah, and this is the background for when I started. So the website itself is a bootstrap template. So, you know, the concept here was I wasn't trying to really impress with my HTML coding skills, because that's not going to happen. I have my background and I could take the bootstrap template and work from there. But I started with, how do I want to incorporate? And you'll recognize I have the instructional design content or concept, the implementation, and possible improvement. So this was my initial process of gathering the information that then became these different categories that I applied for each of the games. So again, I started with no graphics, no visuals, just write down the content, and then from there start building.
Start building the concept. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I also like, you know, the corporate adaptation. You know, that was kind of above and beyond. What inspired you, or why did you think that was important?
So for me, game has become a 4-letter word in corporations. Like, nobody wants to touch it because it's fun and frivolous and not serious. But there is so much that we can learn. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, everyone's spending time on their phones, escaping life. So I really think we have untapped potential in games. And I think we have ways to improve corporate culture by utilizing games. So to me, this is targeted at corporate America. This is, how do we get from point A to point B? So I targeted 2 different obstacles I saw, because identifying the problem is a great first step. But if you're not going to propose any solutions, there's no progress. So the first obstacle that I saw was, I don't know what type of content to pair with what type of game. And so that's where the instructional design concept and the implementation kind of come in. They help you to figure that out, and then take it a step further with your corporate adaptation. I've given you sort of a template here on how you can incorporate that. The second obstacle that I wanted to overcome is, since games are a foreign concept in a lot of ways for a corporate learning environment, how do you get stakeholders on board? If I tell you that I can create a really awesome Construct 3 game, you have no clue what that means unless you've dealt with Construct 3. So this gives you ready-made links to the different levels so your stakeholders can play through. They can try out a card game. They can try out the PowerPoint. They can try out this Construct 3 and see all the different mechanics, see how it would impact them. And for me, that visualization is a way to get more people on board, because they'll know what they're buying into.
Right.
That's where I came from.
Yeah, no, that's great, because you can then see it, and oh, this is what a game could look like. Oh, this is what different levels of games could look like. I could see somebody saying, well, you know, what level? You know, I want a full-fledged, you know, multiplayer role-play game, but I have a PowerPoint budget. Right. So what can I do with PowerPoint? So here you could show them what they could do with PowerPoint versus what they could do with a little bit more of an investment. And I think that's fantastic.
So this is a PowerPoint game that I didn't really go into. And there were obviously very specific restrictions for this assignment, because you have to be able to grade us. You can't give us free rein. But the general concept here is, it's sort of a hybrid of a crossword puzzle and hangman. And it's designed to be a group involvement, so everybody can work together. and you're guessing the names of 8 different deities. So you can see you have the kind of crossword clue set up with the numbers. But if you're not sure where to start, you can guess a letter, but you have to guess conservatively, because if you run out of moonlight, you fail. And so there's the added challenge too of figuring out if you can guess the name before everything gets filled in, then you will earn a card. So A is a very common one. So let's say that we figured out that number 7 is Aries. Yay, I got it right. So now I've collected the Aries card. The idea here is there has to be risk and reward, or there's no actual weight to it. But this is one where I actually piloted this with a game night where I had a group of family and friends, and there were about 16 to 20 people. And it's amazing because I had my cousin Jeff, who's read all of the Percy Jackson novels. So he was like, oh, hey, look, that is a helm, so it's probably Hades. And I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be guessing with everyone. So that was kind of one of the things that you have to sort of walk that thin line to have it challenging enough, but not too challenging. But having a group game is hard from that standpoint.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. And I like how you combine a couple of game concepts. We do talk about that in class, like the combination of a game really is multiple mechanics from different games, right? And if you've only ever played Monopoly, then all your games look like Monopoly.
Right.
And so having those different kind of games and that different kind of background really works well, and it really works effectively. So you developed a lot of games. You went through the program. You had a fantastic experience as a graduate assistant and as an intern.
Yes.
So what advice would you have for someone that says, I don't know, maybe I should just do like an instructional design boot camp, or do I really need to get a master's program? And, what's the advantage of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I highly recommend the master's program. For me, that was critical. As I mentioned, I shopped around a bit, and this is a big shift for me. I have done a few of like the boot camp courses and things like that. There's just not enough time. You can't get all the information. I mean, this is, I think, like a 33 credit program. It went super fast for me. I did it in about a year and a half. I have a friend who has been taking one course a semester. We're not sure when he's going to graduate, so you go at your own pace. But for me, the whole picture, I mean, especially, there are a couple of courses that stand out for me. So instructional design with basically anything with Dr. Brisket. She's got really good theory and practical application. She helps me with simplicity, which I think is lost in today's, ads popping out everywhere kind of environment. So there's the theory and the background that you get from that. There's the authoring courses that gave me access to the tools so that I could design. I mean, I've got 4 or 5 prototype storyline projects. I've got 3 or 4 different Captivate projects that I can pull up and show to potential employers. Like I'm walking away with a portfolio already. And then for me, the kind of crowning jewel was the RFP class, the request for proposal, based on managing e-learning projects, your book that you signed for me, which I'm very grateful for. But that is basically role play to the max. This is a simulation in real time of what's it like to be out in the field as an instructional designer? How do I work as a team with conflicting personalities? I know several teams that kind of crashed and burned dealing with the different dynamic. How do I project manage? How do I take on a different role than maybe what I thought I would do? Like, I am not a graphic designer. How do I learn to overcome that? And then you have to actually do the presentation. I was lucky enough, the spring version does an in-person live presentation. So, I mean, I'm finding a jacket so I can go in there. I'm learning how to pin on a microphone. That to me is irreplaceable experience. You're not going to get that in a boot camp. This was a full long-term semester-long project that I had to have certain deadlines, certain things submitted. And, you know, I had to rely on other people to contribute to it. That, I mean, no matter what, as an instructional designer, you're a collaborator. No matter what, because there's always a subject matter expert, there's always a client, there's always some way that you have to work with someone else. And as much as we may like being introverts and handling our own stuff, you're never going to survive in the industry that way. So that to me was absolutely invaluable. And you can't get that from a boot camp.
No, fantastic. So how did you feel going into your internship? You know, did you feel prepared? Did you feel intimidated? What's that experience like?
I think a lot of people will resonate with this. I struggle with imposter syndrome, especially switching careers. So I wasn't really sure what to expect. And the internship that I got had a pool of like 300 or 400 candidates that whittled down to 2 of us that got selected. So that in and of itself was like, oh, I got to be really good. But walking into the corporate environment, I was really impressed with how prepared I was, because this was over the summer. So I had actually completed a lot of my coursework before then. I mean, I knew the tools that we needed to use. I was suggesting tools. I was finding tools they were already paying for and utilizing them. I felt very confident. Even just the basics of, I designed 2 different presentations. Having the fundamentals of how to design that was critical. And I know, speaking with my colleagues from that, you know, learning and development department, they were all very interested to learn from me the different instructional design principles, anything. They were like sponges trying to get more and more and more. And I mean, I immediately felt like I was keeping up with them, that I was a peer, which was really, really exciting, not knowing going into it whether or not I was prepared for out in the real world.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, such an exciting experience and practical real world experience, applying your skills in the context. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, we could talk all day, but unfortunately, we've run out of time, but this has been fantastic. Any final words for anyone thinking about, you know, instructional design or career changes or anything that you'd like to impart?
Yeah, so I have a couple of tips of what I've kind of learned, and I've sort of touched base on them. So I'll just quickly kind of point them out. The first thing is outline your content. I think I've kind of referenced how I hand wrote out, and then, you know, I typed out some content. So start with a plan. That's very important. And consistency throughout. So recycle content. So once I got those cards in place, I used them as plaques in the museum. I used them in my curator's guide. I use the color scheme everywhere. My background right now is the same thing that I use throughout. So there's a common branding to it. Test out everything a lot. And I think Vishaka said this in her interview. Use as many humans as possible. So I was very lucky to have a wide range within my own family. You don't want just people who are comfortable with technology. You don't want someone who knows the content really well only. You want both. So luckily my dad's really tech savvy and knows a lot about mythology, so he's a great tester. But my mom, not so much. She was even more valuable because when she got stuck, I knew I needed to add instructions or help or a tip. When you're asking for feedback, something to consider is generating a form. So I used Google Forms a bunch, and I asked them specifically, do you enjoy this? Did you have any errors? How was the navigation? Like, prompt your testers so that they know what you're looking for. And the biggest thing is there's a lot of information out there. While we all like to think we're geniuses and came up with this brand new idea, you may not need to struggle through everything. there may be a YouTube video or a website that already explains how to do something that you can adapt. And that was critical for me, instead of banging my head against the wall for hours, was researching to see how other people overcame that problem. And I can't recommend the Bloomsburg Commonwealth University program enough. I am so grateful for everything that I have learned, and the network that is there. So highly recommend, and definitely think that the money, time, effort that I put into this is well worth it.
Great, Jessica. Thanks. It was great having you here and having you as a student. And congratulations again on Best in Show Non-Vendor. Fantastic job. Yay. And thanks for joining this episode of Learning Leaders.
Thank you.